I never thought I'd be the person writing something like this, but my friend can't even bring himself to type it out, so I'm doing it for him, and honestly, I don't know where else this belongs. We're both in our early 20s, university students, and up until recently his family looked completely normal, the kind of family you assume has arguments about bills or chores, not secrets that rip everything apart overnight. The day it happened started boring. He had finished classes early and decided to go home without telling anyone. His mom had mentioned earlier she'd be busy helping a university senior with coursework, something she'd done before, so nothing about that seemed strange. When he unlocked the front door that afternoon, the house was quiet in a way that immediately felt off, not empty, but tense. No TV, no music, just the faint sound of movement coming from the living room. He walked in expecting to see books spread out, maybe a laptop open, but instead he froze. His mom was standing too close to the couch, and the senior, someone he actually recognized from campus, was sitting there in a way that made everything painfully obvious. Nothing explicit was happening in that exact second, but it didn't need to be. The body language, the closeness, the way they both jolted when they saw him said more than words ever could. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then his mom snapped his name sharply, like he was the one who'd done something wrong, and asked why he was home so early. He asked what was going on, even though he already knew. She said she was tutoring him, just like she told him earlier, and gestured toward a notebook on the table. It was open, but completely blank. No notes. No questions. Nothing. He said that wasn't tutoring, that he wasn't stupid, and that she needed to stop lying. The senior wouldn't even look at him, just stared at the floor like a kid caught stealing. When my friend said his dad deserved to know the truth, everything exploded. His mom slapped him hard across the face, not a warning slap, not a shocked reaction, but a full-force slap that knocked his head to the side. She started shouting about how ungrateful he was, how she'd sacrificed everything for this family, how he had no idea what adults do to survive emotionally, and how he had no right to judge her. The senior stood up, muttered something about leaving, but she told him to wait, which somehow made everything worse. My friend said he felt like the room was shrinking, like the walls were closing in, and the woman standing in front of him didn't feel like his mother anymore. He told her again to stop, to calm down, to think about what she was doing, and that's when she said the sentence that still messes him up to repeat. She told him she loved the senior more than she ever loved his dad, and then, without hesitation, she said she was pregnant by him. Not crying. Not ashamed. Just flat, angry, and defensive, like she was daring him to challenge her again. He said his ears started ringing and his stomach dropped so hard he thought he might throw up. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This wasn't a moment that could be explained away. This was something permanent. He asked her how long it had been going on, and she screamed at him to get out of her house if he couldn't support her happiness. She told him his father wouldn't understand, that men never do, and that if he said a word, he'd be the one destroying the family, not her. That was the part that broke him. Not the cheating. Not even the pregnancy. It was the way she rewrote reality in real time and made him the villain for reacting like a normal human being. He left the house shaking, sat in his car for nearly an hour, and didn't tell anyone that night. He didn't go home. He didn't call his dad. He didn't know what to do except sit there replaying every moment of his childhood, wondering how long his mom had been capable of something like this and whether any of it had ever been real. This is only the beginning, because what happened after he finally told his father turned a broken family into something much worse, and the consequences didn't stop with just them. He didn't go home that night, and that alone should tell you how badly his sense of safety was shattered, because until then he had never slept anywhere else without telling his parents. He parked near campus, tried to sleep in his car, failed, then crashed on my couch around 3 a.m. without saying much beyond, "Something's really wrong." The next morning he looked exhausted in a way that wasn't just lack of sleep, like his body had aged 10 years overnight. He kept replaying the scene, not because he didn't believe it happened, but because he couldn't reconcile it with the woman who raised him. Around noon, his mom started calling. He didn't answer. Then she texted, not to apologize, but to say they needed to talk calmly and that he should act like an adult. That phrase stuck with him, because she'd used it the day before as a weapon, as if being an adult meant swallowing lies. He decided he couldn't carry it alone anymore and called his dad, asking him to meet somewhere neutral. They met at a small cafe near his dad's office, and for the first 10 minutes they talked about nothing important: work, classes, traffic, because my friend didn't know how to break the seal without everything spilling out at once. When he finally told him, he didn't dramatize it. He just said what he saw, what she said, and what she admitted. His dad didn't react the way people expect in stories. He didn't yell or throw things. He went quiet, stared at the table, and asked the same question 3 times in different ways, like he was hoping one version would undo the others. When my friend mentioned the pregnancy, his dad stood up abruptly, left money on the table, and walked outside without a word. They sat in the car for a long time after that. His dad kept rubbing his face and saying he needed to hear it directly from her, that there had to be some explanation, even though his voice already sounded hollow. They went back to the house together that evening. The senior wasn't there, but his presence was everywhere: an extra mug in the sink, a jacket draped over a chair that didn't belong to anyone in the family. His mom acted irritated, not guilty. She accused my friend of running to daddy and told her husband they needed to talk privately. He refused and said there would be no private conversations anymore. That's when the gaslighting really started. She downplayed the relationship, said it was emotional at first, then physical, then claimed her husband had been distant for years and that loneliness does things to people. When he asked about the pregnancy, she hesitated just long enough to make it clear she'd been hoping to avoid that detail. She confirmed it and said she planned to keep the baby, adding that the senior was more supportive than her husband had ever been. My friend watched his dad's face collapse in slow motion. The man didn't cry. He just looked defeated, like someone realizing they'd been living in a parallel version of their own life. The argument escalated fast. His dad demanded the relationship end immediately. His mom laughed and said he couldn't control her anymore. When my friend spoke up, she turned on him again, calling him disloyal and accusing him of trying to punish her for being happy. At one point she said something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. She told him she hadn't asked to be a mother and that sacrifices don't count if they weren't a choice. His dad told her to stop, told her she didn't get to rewrite 20 years of family life to justify an affair. She told him he could leave if he couldn't accept reality. That's when he did something none of us expected. He said fine, grabbed a bag, and walked out. Not in anger, not dramatically, just like someone who finally understood there was nothing left to argue for. After that, the house felt wrong, like the air itself was heavy. My friend stayed that night because his dad asked him to, not because he wanted to. His mom didn't speak to him at all, except to say he should think carefully about whose side he was on. The next morning, the senior showed up again, openly this time, and acted like he belonged there. That was the moment my friend realized this wasn't going to blow over quietly. This wasn't a secret affair caught at the wrong time. This was a deliberate choice his mother had already made, and everyone else was just collateral damage. What he didn't know yet was that the senior had his own version of the story, and when that version started coming out, things went from painful to dangerous in ways none of us saw coming. The senior didn't try to hide anymore after that, and that shift alone made everything worse, because secrecy at least leaves room for denial, while openness forces everyone to confront reality whether they're ready or not. He started coming over during the day, parking his car in the driveway like he'd always belonged there, walking through the front door without knocking, making himself coffee in a kitchen my friend had grown up in. My friend said the first time he saw him sitting at the table reading mail, something inside him snapped, not violently, but permanently. The senior acted calm, polite, almost rehearsed, like he'd practiced how to look reasonable under pressure. He spoke about the relationship as if it had evolved naturally, saying they'd connected over conversations, shared interests, mutual loneliness, carefully avoiding any mention of power dynamics or how wrong it felt to everyone else. When my friend confronted him directly and asked how long it had really been going on, the answer was vague, which somehow felt more insulting than a number. His mom hovered nearby during the conversation, interrupting whenever things got uncomfortable, correcting wording, steering blame away from herself. At one point, the senior tried to justify the pregnancy by saying it wasn't planned but wasn't unwanted, which landed like a slap across the room. My friend told him to leave, that this wasn't his house, and his mom immediately stepped between them and said it was her house too and she'd decide who was welcome. That was the moment my friend realized she wasn't confused or manipulated, she was committed. His dad, meanwhile, had moved into a short-term rental nearby and was barely holding himself together. He oscillated between anger and numbness, asking logistical questions about finances one moment and staring blankly at the wall the next. When he finally asked his wife whether she planned to stay married, she didn't answer directly. She said labels didn't matter anymore and that people changed, which was as close to a confirmation as he needed. The divorce conversation started quietly but escalated fast when she insisted she shouldn't be punished for choosing honesty. My friend sat through those discussions feeling like an object passed between them, his presence used as leverage more than concern. His mom kept framing everything as an attack on her autonomy, while his dad kept asking how someone could erase decades so casually. What made things more complicated was the senior's involvement in university life. Rumors started circulating before my friend could even process what was happening at home. People whispered, asked questions that sounded innocent but weren't, and suddenly his private trauma became public gossip. The senior didn't help matters. He showed up to campus events with my friend's mom, openly affectionate, which fueled speculation and resentment. My friend confronted him again after class one day, telling him he'd destroyed a family. The senior replied that families break for many reasons and that blaming one person was simplistic, which felt like someone explaining morality from a textbook while ignoring the human cost. That conversation ended with the senior warning him not to cause trouble, saying the situation was already fragile and didn't need interference. That phrasing stuck with my friend, interference, as if the family he was born into was now an inconvenience. Things took another turn when the pregnancy became visible enough that denial was no longer an option. Extended family members noticed. Questions started coming from aunts, uncles, grandparents. His mom controlled the narrative tightly, telling people the marriage had been struggling for years and that the relationship was new but meaningful. Anyone who questioned her was labeled judgmental or unsupportive. His dad withdrew further, skipping family gatherings and letting calls go unanswered. My friend tried to hold both sides together and failed at both. At home, his mom accused him of siding against her. With his dad, he felt guilty for not protecting him more. The senior continued acting like a partner, discussing baby names, rearranging furniture, making long-term plans in a space that still felt haunted by the past. The final straw for my friend came when he overheard his mom telling someone on the phone that everything was finally settling down, that the worst part was over. That's when he realized this wasn't a temporary crisis, it was a new normal she had already accepted. What he didn't know yet was that the senior wasn't as confident as he appeared, and cracks were forming beneath the surface that would soon turn this situation from emotional fallout into something much more volatile. The cracks started showing when the senior's confidence slipped, because once the shock wore off, real-life pressure replaced whatever fantasy had carried them this far. He began staying over more often, not out of affection but convenience, and the house shifted again, this time into something tense and unstable. My friend noticed how arguments between his mom and the senior didn't sound like disagreements between equals. They sounded rushed, defensive, and transactional, like two people trying to convince themselves they hadn't made irreversible mistakes. Money became the first obvious stress point. The senior was still finishing his degree, juggling part-time work, and suddenly talking about a baby in practical terms instead of abstract ones. My friend overheard fights about rent, childcare, and whether he should move in officially. His mom grew more controlling, correcting the senior in front of others, snapping when he questioned decisions, reminding him she'd risked everything for him. The dynamic shifted fast, and it was uncomfortable to watch. Meanwhile, his dad filed for separation, not dramatically, but efficiently, like someone cleaning up a mess they never made. He stopped asking questions and focused on logistics, which somehow hurt more than anger. My friend tried to stay neutral, but neutrality wasn't allowed. His mom accused him of undermining her by spending time with his dad. His dad never said it outright, but the disappointment was visible. Extended family lines were drawn, and every phone call felt like a loyalty test. Things escalated when university administration got involved. Rumors had reached the wrong ears, and while nothing illegal had occurred, the optics were bad enough to trigger inquiries. The senior became paranoid, checking emails constantly, snapping at my friend for not keeping things contained, as if containment had ever been possible. One night, after a particularly loud argument, the senior stormed out and didn't come back until the next afternoon. When he returned, his demeanor had changed. He was quieter, less certain, asking questions about timelines and legal responsibilities instead of future plans. My friend's mom interpreted this as betrayal. She accused him of panicking, of reconsidering now that things were real. The argument turned ugly fast, with accusations flying about manipulation, promises, and who owed what to whom. My friend stayed in his room, listening, feeling like a hostage in a house that no longer felt like his. The breaking point came when the senior suggested, cautiously, that maybe slowing things down would be better for everyone. That suggestion detonated everything. His mom screamed that he'd ruined her marriage and now wanted to walk away, that she'd destroyed her life for him. The senior fired back that he never asked her to do that she'd made her own choices. That was the first time my friend heard someone say it out loud, and it landed hard. The next morning, the senior didn't come back. His mom spent the day pacing, calling, leaving messages that shifted from angry to desperate within minutes. When she finally sat down with my friend, she didn't apologize. She told him this was why she needed his support, why families should stick together when outsiders failed them. He didn't respond, because for the first time he saw clearly that she wasn't asking for understanding, she was asking for validation. His dad called later that night and said he was moving farther away, closer to work, and that my friend could stay with him anytime. That offer felt like a lifeline and a betrayal at the same time. When the senior finally returned days later, it wasn't to reconcile but to collect his things. The conversation between him and my friend's mom was quiet and cold, stripped of emotion. He said he wasn't ready for what this had become. She told him he'd regret abandoning his child. He didn't respond. After he left, the house felt hollow, not relieved. My friend realized then that the chaos wasn't over, it was just changing shape. His mom wasn't grieving a relationship, she was preparing for a fight, and the next phase would pull everyone in deeper than before. The silence after the senior left was heavier than any argument had been, because it forced everyone to sit with consequences instead of distractions. My friend's mom tried to act functional at first, throwing herself into routines, cleaning obsessively, reorganizing rooms that didn't need reorganizing, as if rearranging furniture could reset her life. She stopped mentioning the senior by name but referenced him constantly in complaints about people who run when things get hard. My friend noticed how her mood swung unpredictably, calm one moment and explosive the next, especially when anything reminded her of the future she'd imagined. Doctor appointments started appearing on the calendar, circled in red marker, and she announced them like facts no one was allowed to question. She told my friend he needed to step up now, that family meant responsibility, that regardless of how things started, a child was coming and that should matter more than hurt feelings. The way she framed it made him feel like he was being conscripted into a life he hadn't chosen. Meanwhile, his dad finalized temporary arrangements and stopped engaging emotionally altogether. Conversations with him became practical: bank accounts, insurance, what items he'd be taking from the house. My friend felt like he was losing both parents in different ways, one to denial and one to withdrawal. Extended family pressure intensified. Some relatives sided with his mom, praising her for choosing honesty and telling my friend not to abandon her when she needed support most. Others quietly checked in on him, offering couches, meals, escape routes. The conflicting advice left him exhausted. Things took another turn when the senior reappeared, not in person but through messages. He reached out late one night, apologizing in vague terms, saying he was overwhelmed and needed time to think. My friend didn't respond at first, but the messages kept coming, shifting tone from regret to defensiveness. The senior said he was being painted as a villain, that the situation was more complicated than people understood, and that he hadn't expected the fallout to be this severe. Eventually, my friend replied with a single question: whether he planned to be involved with the child. The answer was careful and non-committal, full of phrases like figuring things out and wanting to do the right thing, which somehow felt worse than a clear refusal. When my friend showed the messages to his mom, she exploded, accusing him of sabotaging reconciliation. She demanded he stop interfering and let adults handle adult problems. That argument ended with her saying something that changed how he saw her permanently. That if it came down to choosing between her happiness and his comfort, she would choose herself every time. After that, he stopped trying to mediate. He began spending more time at his dad's place, slowly moving personal items over without announcing it. His mom noticed but pretended not to, maintaining the illusion of control. University became another battleground. The senior's name circulated again, tied to rumors about responsibility and avoidance. Some people sympathized with him, others didn't, but the attention alone was destabilizing. My friend found himself answering questions he never volunteered to answer, defending choices he didn't make. One afternoon, he was called into an administrative office, not for discipline, but for a check-in. The conversation was polite, cautious, but the subtext was clear: situations like this attract scrutiny, and everyone involved should be careful. That warning added another layer of stress. Back at home, his mom began preparing the baby's room. Watching her paint walls and assemble furniture with forced optimism felt surreal, like observing someone rehearsing a future that might never arrive the way she expected. She spoke less about the senior and more about independence, about proving she didn't need anyone. At the same time, legal documents started arriving: custody discussions, financial obligations, timelines. Reality was closing in. My friend realized he was standing at a crossroads without a map. Staying meant being absorbed into a narrative that erased his pain. Leaving meant guilt and distance he wasn't sure he could live with. The final moment that pushed him toward a decision came quietly, not in an argument but in a conversation with his dad, who told him he didn't need to choose sides to choose himself. That sentence stayed with him, because for the first time since everything began, it felt like permission. By the time my friend made the decision to move out fully, the house had already stopped feeling like a shared space and started feeling like contested territory, where every object carried an argument behind it. He didn't announce anything, he just packed what he needed over a few trips and left the rest behind, because arguing over belongings felt pointless when the bigger losses were emotional. His mom noticed eventually and reacted not with sadness but irritation, accusing him of being dramatic and abandoning her when she needed stability. He didn't engage anymore. The distance gave him clarity he hadn't had before. Living with his dad was quieter, not happy exactly, but predictable, which felt like relief. His dad kept conversations short and avoided discussing his mom unless necessary, focusing instead on routines, work, and letting time do what arguments couldn't. Meanwhile, his mom's situation became increasingly complicated. The senior stopped messaging altogether, and when legal paperwork started circulating more formally, it became clear he was seeking advice rather than reconciliation. That shift enraged her. She framed it as cowardice, as proof that men always escape consequences, and she began talking openly about taking control of the situation herself. My friend heard about this secondhand through relatives, who relayed updates with thinly veiled concern. At the same time, she started posting selectively on social media, crafting a version of events where she was resilient, wronged, and moving forward bravely. The posts weren't outright lies, but they were carefully edited, and watching strangers praise her strength felt surreal to my friend, like witnessing his own history being rewritten publicly. University life didn't provide the escape he'd hoped for. People treated him differently, more cautiously, like he was fragile or contagious. Some asked invasive questions disguised as concern. Others avoided him altogether. He learned quickly who actually listened and who just wanted details. The administrative check-ins continued, always polite, always vague, but persistent enough to keep stress simmering. His dad encouraged him to focus on finishing the semester, reminding him that whatever happened between adults didn't have to derail his future. That advice helped more than he expected. The real confrontation came unexpectedly. His mom showed up unannounced at his dad's place one evening, visibly upset and clearly not there to reconcile. She accused his dad of turning their son against her and demanded he come home. When my friend stepped in and said he wasn't ready, she snapped, saying readiness was irrelevant and family obligations didn't pause for discomfort. The argument escalated fast. She accused him of choosing sides, of punishing her for being honest, of caring more about appearances than people. When he told her he needed space, she laughed bitterly and said space was just another word for abandonment. His dad ended the conversation by asking her to leave. That moment cemented something for my friend. Seeing his dad set a firm boundary without hostility showed him that distance didn't have to be cruel to be necessary. After that, contact with his mom became sporadic and transactional. Messages focused on logistics, appointments, updates she felt entitled to share. He responded minimally. Inside, guilt still flared occasionally, especially when he thought about the child that would be born into this mess, but guilt alone wasn't enough to undo what had been broken. Weeks passed, and the legal process moved forward. Financial arrangements were discussed, timelines established, responsibilities clarified. The senior remained mostly absent, communicating through intermediaries. His mom interpreted that absence as betrayal and began preparing for conflict, talking about rights, accountability, and fairness. The stress took a visible toll on her, something my friend noticed during brief, tense interactions. She looked exhausted, not empowered. Despite everything, there were moments when my friend felt a pull to help, to soften things, but every time he tried, the conversation turned into a demand for validation rather than understanding. Slowly, he accepted that compassion didn't mean compliance. The semester ended, and with it came a strange calm, not because things were resolved, but because the chaos had settled into a pattern. My friend understood then that the story wasn't moving toward closure anytime soon. It was branching outward, creating long-term consequences that would surface in unexpected ways. And just when he thought the worst had already happened, a phone call arrived that made it clear the next phase wouldn't be about family arguments at all, but about accountability, and who would be forced to face it first. The phone call came on an ordinary afternoon, which somehow made it worse, because it shattered the illusion that life was slowly stabilizing. My friend was at his dad's place, working on an assignment, when an unfamiliar number flashed on his screen. He almost ignored it, assuming it was spam, but something told him not to. The caller identified herself as a legal representative involved in an ongoing family matter and asked if he had time to talk. The wording was careful, professional, and immediately unsettling. She explained that his mother had initiated formal proceedings related to the pregnancy, and because of conflicting accounts and prior statements, his name had come up as someone who might be asked to clarify events. My friend felt his stomach drop. He hadn't done anything wrong, but the idea of being pulled officially into the situation made everything feel heavier and more permanent. The caller stressed that this wasn't an accusation, just a request for cooperation if needed, but the implication was clear: the story was no longer staying within the family. When he told his dad, the reaction was quiet but firm. His dad said they'd handle it carefully and that he didn't need to protect anyone at the expense of himself. That reassurance helped, but it didn't erase the anxiety. Over the next few days, pieces started falling into place. His mom became more aggressive in her communication, sending long messages that mixed fear, anger, and urgency. She talked about being treated unfairly, about people twisting her words, about needing her son to tell the truth if asked. The phrasing bothered him, because it framed truth as something adjustable, something that could be shaped depending on loyalty. When he didn't respond the way she wanted, the tone shifted. She accused him of abandoning her when she was most vulnerable, of siding with people who wanted to ruin her life. At the same time, the senior resurfaced indirectly. His lawyer reached out to clarify timelines and interactions, carefully distancing him from responsibility beyond legal obligations. That move inflamed tensions further. Rumors began circulating again, this time about potential disputes rather than personal drama. My friend found himself scrutinizing his own memories, replaying conversations to make sure he remembered them clearly, afraid that stress might distort something important. He met with a counselor provided through the university, not because he wanted advice on what to do, but because he needed someone neutral to remind him he wasn't imagining how bad this was. The counselor helped him articulate something he'd been struggling to name. That his mother wasn't asking him to lie outright, but to selectively forget, and that was still a form of manipulation. That insight brought clarity, but also grief. It meant accepting that the relationship he wanted with her might not be possible anymore. As the due date approached, pressure intensified. His mom's messages became shorter and sharper, focusing on urgency and consequences. She reminded him repeatedly that she was carrying his sibling, as if biology alone should override everything else. He felt torn, not because he doubted his boundaries, but because he understood how complicated love becomes when trust is damaged. The legal process moved forward slowly, but visibly. Documents were filed, statements prepared, roles defined. My friend was advised to keep communication minimal and factual, advice that felt cold but necessary. One evening, he received a message from his mom that simply said, "I never thought you'd do this to me." He didn't reply. Not because he didn't care, but because responding would reopen a cycle he was trying to step out of. Around this time, his dad shared something he hadn't said before, that he felt guilty for not seeing the signs earlier, for assuming stability where there wasn't any. That admission shifted something between them. My friend realized his dad wasn't just recovering from betrayal, but from self-blame. That mutual understanding strengthened their relationship in quiet ways. As the situation edged closer to a legal reckoning, my friend understood that whatever outcome came next would define not just responsibilities, but relationships permanently. He wasn't bracing for a dramatic showdown anymore, he was preparing for a long-term reality where choices had consequences that couldn't be undone. And with that understanding came a difficult acceptance. Protecting himself didn't mean destroying his mother, it meant refusing to carry the weight of decisions he didn't make, even if that refusal changed their relationship forever. By the time the situation reached its quiet resolution, my friend understood that closure rarely looks like relief and almost never looks like justice. The legal process didn't end with dramatic confrontations or public reckonings, but with documents, timelines, and decisions made in rooms none of us ever saw. His involvement turned out to be limited, as promised, though the emotional toll lingered far longer than the paperwork. The senior accepted a defined level of responsibility, not out of reconciliation or moral awakening, but because it was unavoidable. His mom framed the outcome as survival, not consequence, telling anyone who would listen that she'd been forced to grow up fast. She stopped reaching out as often once it became clear my friend wouldn't offer emotional validation on demand. When the baby was born, the news reached him through a relative instead of directly, which felt symbolic of how fragmented everything had become. He didn't rush to meet the child, not out of anger, but because he didn't know where he fit anymore. His dad encouraged him to take things at his own pace, reminding him that relationships built on obligation rarely heal properly. Over time, life settled into something quieter. My friend finished the semester, then the year, and eventually stopped waking up with that tight, anxious feeling in his chest. His mom's world shrank in noticeable ways, fewer social posts, fewer people around her, but she leaned into the narrative that she'd chosen independence and paid the price for it. The senior faded from relevance, becoming a name attached to responsibility rather than emotion. When my friend finally met his sibling months later, it wasn't the emotional explosion people expect in stories. It was awkward, subdued, and human. He felt compassion for a child born into circumstances they didn't choose, alongside grief for the family structure that no longer existed. That mix of emotions didn't resolve neatly, but it stopped feeling like a contradiction. His relationship with his mom remained strained but civil, defined by boundaries instead of closeness. She never apologized directly, and he eventually accepted that an apology might never come. What surprised him most was how much stronger his bond with his dad became, not because of shared anger, but because of shared honesty. They learned how to talk without trying to fix each other, which felt like progress neither had expected. Looking back, my friend said the hardest part wasn't discovering the affair or the pregnancy. It was realizing that love doesn't protect you from harm when accountability is missing. He learned that choosing distance doesn't mean choosing cruelty, and that refusing to carry someone else's justifications isn't betrayal. The story didn't end with forgiveness or revenge, but with clarity, which turned out to be more valuable. Some relationships survived in altered forms, others didn't, and that unevenness became something he learned to live with instead of fight against. When people ask him now how he handled it, he doesn't give dramatic answers. He just says he stopped trying to explain himself to people who needed him to stay confused. And that, more than anything, is how the story ended, not with resolution, but with the quiet understanding that sometimes the healthiest outcome is walking forward without waiting for everyone else to catch up.